G'day. How you going? Is my weird Swedish Australian accent making sense to you so far? Okay, I'm seeing a few nods. Fantastic. As you were walking in today or this morning, I was quietly observing a number of you, which sounds a little bit stalkerish. That was not my intent. But specifically what I was observing was what many of you were wearing on your sleeves or your wrists, which does sound kind of awkward and stalkerish. But what struck me was that a number of you insist on wearing these high-tech devices, analog watches. Ladies and gentlemen, can we just raise our hands, please, for a moment if we are wearing an analog watch today? Fantastic. Look around the room, ladies and gentlemen. That's like 40% of the room. Just a quick check. Who's not going to raise their hands no matter what I asked this morning? Okay, it is a trick question, but just so I know. Fantastic. For all the Gen Ys in the room who don't know what an analog watch is, you're seeing an example, although kind of a digital example, here on the screen this morning. But my question is, why do we insist on wearing these high-tech analog devices, the good old analog watch, in an era where we have digital time all around us? Digital time that's accurate, precise, scientific, and that automatically updates no matter what time zone that we happen to be in. Digital time that we then have to set our analog watches by once a week to make sure these things are actually accurate. Why do we wear these? That is not a rhetorical question. Fashion. Yes, for me it's also a little bit of man bling. I agree. Any other reasons? Habit, of course, it is a habit that is hard to kind of break, right? It's so easy and convenient just to pull out your watch like this. I was in Atlanta, Georgia last year speaking at an agribusiness conference, and one of the Gen Y women in the audience said, because it's emotionally intelligent to wear an analog watch, because it's so rude when you're in an important business meeting to pull out your iPhone to check the time, so I just do this instead. And I think that's an intergenerational comment if there ever was one. Was anyone given your watch, perhaps by a loved one? Okay, fantastic. So it either has some emotional sentiment or maybe you just have to wear it. It's usually one or the other, right? Yes? One of my key arguments here today is not to talk about time necessarily, analog or digital, but to explore this idea of the old school and the new school, the analog and the digital, and to look at the fact that even in an age where we want to win the hearts and the minds of various stakeholders and tomorrow's learners, to win their increasingly digitized rational minds, we must still seek to win their enduringly emotional analog hearts. The analog, the face-to-face, the old school, the human touch, the personality, the human pedagogy still has a room, still has space in an increasingly digitally disrupted future. As a futurist, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with this idea of digitization. On the one hand, I love what digital can do for us in terms of connecting us intergenerationally, globally, across boundaries, be they state or international. I also love the fact that digital gives young Aussie kids like Max Harpham the ability to do well at school. Little Max Harpham here is an 8-year-old kid who lives in Hornsby in Sydney, New South Wales. He's 8 years old, loves his extreme sports, his skateboarding. He's the top scorer in the Hornsby under 8s, under 9s soccer team. And he's doing very well at school. And he's a really cool little public speaker as well, which gives me kind of goosebumps. This is all pretty amazing because Max Harpham, who's the 8-year-old son of my colleague in my research think tank, Emma Harpham, and her husband Aaron Harpham, was born profoundly deaf. If a freight train went past little Max Harpham's back, he would not be able to hear it. Yes, he might sense it, but he wouldn't have any analog hearing to provide him with the feedback that a freight train was passing behind his back. But because of a great Australian innovation, in high tech, the cochlear implant, he's able to digitally amplify sound where there was none. And what really gives me digital goosebumps is that once a year during his swimming carnival, he's the only kid that can properly hear underwater. This is the capacity, the capability, and the promise of the digital world. This is how Max is able to connect cross-generationally with Emma and with Aaron, with his sister India, with his teachers, with his peers. This is how he's able to figure out whether he's got a good chance to score at soccer because of a great Australian innovation in high tech, because of digitally amplified sound. This gives me digital goosebumps. But I also have some misgivings about the digital world, because the digital world can be extremely disruptive if you, as a business leader, as an educator, as a learner, are not adaptive. But it's only disruptive if you're not adaptive, if you're not agile, if you're not willing to learn. Let me give you one example that's very close to my heart. Let me take you back nearly 100 years in history to my native Stockholm for just a moment. Now, Sweden is not famous, by the way, for making great analog watches. That's Switzerland. Once upon a time, Sweden was great at exporting amazing tennis players like Bjorn Borg and Stefan Edberg. Unfortunately, today we suck. And recently we just had to qualify against Denmark, the New Zealand of Scandinavia. When it comes to tennis, sorry to all the Kiwis in the audience here today, not to retain our elite division status, but our Division 1 status in tennis. This really, really hurts my national pride, or 50% of my national pride. So Sweden is not famous for making our great watches. We also suck at exporting cheese and chocolate. Again, that's Switzerland, not Sweden. So it's sort of ironic that in this particular advertisement that you see here, ladies and gentlemen, Swiss Tissot watches, proudly Swiss since 1853, is advertised over a map of Sweden and Norway. This is like advertising Austrian Swarovski crystals over a map of Kalgoorlie or Lithgow. So whoever made this ad should have been fired, or at least never passed year 8 geography. But that's neither here nor there. Let me take you back to the center of this watch for a moment of sort of Swedish historical pedagogy. Let me take you back to the 1910s, a time that was somewhat simpler. This urban vista, this black and white vista, in an age that was somewhat more black and white, either or. This was the urban vista that greeted a man by the name of Georg Johansson as he moved from the Swedish countryside, from his family farm that he wasn't going to inherit, to take up an apprenticeship in the urban landscape of Stockholm. He moved to this urban vista, an urban vista that had just a few years prior hosted the 1912 Swedish, or the Stockholm Summer Olympics. His apprenticeship was in a bricks and mortar store, and Georg Johansson, or the son of Johan, which sounds very sort of Viking-esque, was to eventually set up his own shop after completing his apprenticeship, to add a little bit of color to what the Swedish gentlemen of the time were wearing, because there was only black or white clothing back then. His business was always built on the foundations of the face-to-face, the heart-to-heart, the belly-to-belly, the bespoke. Now, this was a time before selfies, before YouTube, when looking into a video camera was still very much of a technological novelty. And in a time that was a little bit simpler than the times we now live in a nod of respect to his agribusiness and his farming background, Georg Johansson, as he became a man of commerce, changed his surname from the son of Johan or Johansson to the man from the southern farm, or the man from Sörboda, in Swedish, Sorman. He's my great-grandfather. And as you can tell, Yeor must have been a futurist already back in the day because he's got a great haircut and a really cool pocket square. Clearly you can tell that in our family, the mothers still dress us and fold our clothes every night before we go to bed. Clearly some things here are timeless, right? And for many years, this former apprentice did well. He used to win both the hearts and the minds of yesteryear's customers by great advertisements like these ones. And I should just apologize to all the ladies to say that this was pre-feminism. But these kind of advertisements in analog printed media used to work. They used to connect him with yesteryear's consumers and customers. The little shop did well for many years, but now for my mum, Birgitta, who looks amazing for 106, we moisturize in Sweden, as you can tell. For her, she's needing to reskill herself. She's needed to reskill herself at age nearly 60, and her staff in an era of digital retail, of mobile commerce, of pricing transparency, and increasing expectations on customer service, while at the same time keeping prices lower. New digitized inventory systems that she doesn't quite yet understand. This is a challenging time to her. She's living through the era of what I like to call digital disruption, an era in which we all now live. Because what's happening today is the prospective consumer walks into the shop. They get to hang out with mum and her tailor Hassan with their little measuring tapes. They get free intellectual property handed over to them. They get a sense of the seasonally adjusted girth. It gets pretty cold in Sweden in wintertime. And they get some advice that maybe we should just allow an extra inch in the pants this particular season. She gets to tell them about the provenance of the materials from Italy, the kind of routes they've traveled from, maybe some of Hassan's tailoring mates in Turkey, for example. But the consumer today wants more. On their way to mum or to Hassan, they've scanned a few barcodes with their mobile phones. They've already comparison shopped online beforehand to know the exact pricing transparency in an age of information symmetry. Then they'll say, thank you very much for those measurements, which they gladly write down or type into their mobile phones in front of mum or Hassan. We'll think about it. And then they exit the store to the sound of a very, very lonely little bell. Then maybe they go around the corner outside on Sankt Eriksgatan before they then order the item online. Do you think that this is somewhat disruptive to my mum's third generation business model? Do you think there's some stuff she could do to bring her business into the 21st century? Absolutely. But mum doesn't really like change, and I think this is somewhat human. Who sort of struggles with change here in the room? Anybody? Okay, fantastic. Who remembers the good old days, right? Yeah. Nostalgia can be kind of a beautiful thing. Change can be very, very difficult. I mean, we don't like to change hairdressers. We order the same coffee every morning. And when it comes to Hawaiian pizza, yes, that's the one we order every time. Change can be difficult. Who's been through puberty? I mean, these are awkward times, right? Change can be difficult, right? Has anyone ever thought of changing a partner? And not necessarily physically exchanging them, because that can be very, very expensive, I know from experience, but like selling them on the concept of agility and change. This conversation usually happens around the 31st of December each year when we make our New Year's resolutions. Change can be difficult. Agility, learning can be somewhat challenging at times. And for my mum, she thinks of herself as the custodian of heritage and doing things just like her dad and his dad before him did it. She's perfectly prepared for a world that no longer exists. And how annoying must it be to have a son who's a futurist? Can you imagine our family dinners? I call them management consulting sessions. She just says, Mum's just going to cook up for you. And by the way, in Australia here, mums are always right, right? So we have some pretty interesting conversations. Mum's personality identity crisis right now is that she doesn't know where on this continuum between, on the one hand, the analog, the old school, the human touch, and the digital, the cyber, the virtual, the interface to interface, she should position her business. She knows this, yet this is disrupting her very existence. This means that she constantly has to cut staff because she cannot afford to keep them on board. She cannot afford, she thinks, to retrain them for a digital future. But I don't think it's a choice of either or. I think the two can actually coexist. Do you think if she started taking some of the big data, some of the insights about the seasonally adjusted girth, the color preferences and the material preferences of her customers, and she was able to map all of that in a great customer relationship management tool to send out targeted advertisements to a segment of just one person, where she told and amplified the story of this now 98-year-old store to the customers, do you think she might win both some digital minds and some analog hearts? Absolutely. Yet she goes, Anders, du förstår inte. Våra kunder vet inte hur man använder internet. Which is really profound if you speak Swedish. But what it means is, son, you don't understand. Our clients don't know how to use the internet. I don't know if you've ever heard similar resistance. Yeah? We're living in an age today where the government tells our baby boomers and our Gen Xers that you need to keep working till 67 or 70. We're going to need some re-education, some retraining, some reskilling, some selling of change and new behaviors. Absolutely. So this is what's facing Mum. She's going into a gunfight with the likes of Amazon.com/fashion that incentivizes shoppers to scan barcodes, upload to Amazon's cloud-based comparative price comparison tool for a 5% discount, building their big database of comparative pricing. And she's wielding a little kitchen knife against this digital threat. I have three arguments here today that I'm about to get to. Firstly, the fact that everything that can be digitized in the workforce sooner or later will become digitized. This refers to things like supply chain, to marketing, to inventory management, to things like GPS technology being used in agribusiness, or even computers and people playing computer games driving massive trucks in mining. Everything that can be digitized will become digitized. The second argument is that increasingly Australians are taking life lessons into their own hands, literally via their mobile devices, meaning a huge opportunity for smart and adaptive training providers to connect via mobile screens. And thirdly, the sort of counter-trend idea to all of this digitization, which is that yes, our minds might increasingly seek information, want information in the digital world, but we must not throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. The analog, the learning on in the workplace, the mentorship, the transformation that can happen in the analog world will still enduringly be critical. That's plan A, there's no plan B, so this is what we're going to go with. Okay. All right, first argument. Let me just give you the sort of terms of reference here for a moment between these two random worlds that I've talked about, the analog and the digital. The analog world, of course, is the face-to-face. The digital world is interface to interface. The analog world is old school. The digital world is new school. One of these worlds is about the offline. The other one is about the online. The analog world is about the personal touch. The digital is about the digital connect. One is about the 9 to 5, the other one's 24/7, 365. One is about the high touch, the other one about the high tech. And one, I believe, is about winning hearts, the other one about winning minds. And as a good training provider of tomorrow, you need to be able to do both. First argument, everything is now digitizing. Deloitte Digital put out this report just recently. Is it too early in the morning, by the way, to talk about X and Y axes? Okay, I've got about a third of the audience with me. The numerate people who love numbers and models, etc., right? It's highly kind of visual, this chart as well. In this report, which Deloitte termed the short fuse Big Bang theory of digital disruption, on the x-axis what you have is the length of the fuse until digital disruption hits your industry, either short or rather extended in years from 0 to 5. And on the y-axis what you have is the size of the impact in your industry, either rather contained or at the top very large. That wasn't very good audio. Better, large impact. Check out where your industry might be sitting. Are you training people in mining? You might be going, hey, this is going to take a longer period of time and the impact might not be quite as big. Well, you might think that. But some of you might be training people in ICT or media or retail trade. We all know that mum sits in the quadrant, which is short fuse, big bang. This is her challenge. Some of you might be working with real estate or construction. We're moving from a construction phase into a productivity or production phase here in WA. Some of you might be working with accommodation and food services, or short fuse, and some a big bang, small bang. Some things will take a little bit longer. But if you're an education provider and you think that, hey, we sit up here, it's going to take a little bit longer for us to get up to education being digitally disrupted. No, because all of you guys are selling and providing training services in all of these industries, all of which will be digitally disrupted. As I've said, this refers to things like supply chains being digital, to how we drive our vehicles. Google has brought out a driverless car just recently. This has been happening in agribusiness for years. Farmers used to drive a tractor, they no longer do, right? And we're not so far away from the farmer who might be a Gen Z sitting in his or her little office just doing everything via remote control, because this is how they know how to play computer games. It's just that the result, the output and the yield might be highly analog. Okay, when we think ahead as well about the next generation, not just the Gen Ys, which used to get so much media and so much press, but we think to the next generation, how they will do business, how they will interact, how they will learn and communicate, I get really worried. Because according to AVG IT Security, more 2 to 5-year-olds in the Western world today know how to play Angry Birds on their mobile phones than actually know how to tie their shoelaces. Are there any parents of 2 to 5-year-olds in the room here today? Okay, fantastic. This is not the parenting session, but if you thought Gen Y were just a little bit weird, how weird is this next generation going to be? For them, a magazine on the floor or a training manual on the floor is simply an iPad that doesn't work. But they'll try and squeeze it and try and bring it alive and try to go from one hyperlink to another. Truly, these guys are born digital. They're part of the digital native generation, the digital natives who speak technology without an accent, unlike some of us who speak technology with a heavy accent. And the question is, are you prepared in your training materials, in your website, in your mobile presence to win their digital minds? These guys are only a few years away from TAFE, from mobile learning, from apprenticeships. These are the guys that you have to think about. We are going to get to the baby boomers later on in this presentation as well, but think about how prepared you are for them. These are guys who are, and girls of course, who are happy to take learning matters into their own hands, who've realized that education no longer has a monopoly on education. They'll happily go on Khan Academy, Udacity, Udemy, and enrolled in massive, open, online courses and learn that way. which is pretty empowering for the learner. But what does it do? Well, it's maybe digitally disruptive to the middleman or the middlewoman or the RTO trying to sell them a certificate 1, 2, 3, or 4. Because some of these people are going to think, hey, we know how to do it anyway because Salman Khan told us how to do it on Khan Academy on YouTube. This, of course, raises some quality issues. Yeah? Would Newcrest, for example, hire someone who says that they've watched a few YouTube videos? Maybe not quite yet, but we might in the future. The Harvard Business Review is writing about the fact that now people are getting, and by people I mean Gen Zs and Gen Ys mostly, are now getting recruited directly out of games like World of Warcraft into international corporations. Why? Well, if you were a global multinational organization and you wanted someone who would be a really good leader of a virtual team, a distributed team around the world of people of different ethnicities, different religions, where better to look than someone who's led teams exactly like that, albeit by avatars in the digital world? Why is it that Nissan is now recruiting for its real analog rally drivers directly from Gran Turismo digital games to compete on the real analog circuit? Because people who've grown up playing Gran Turismo can probably drive a real car. And what you should be thinking about is this relevant to maybe driving trucks or driving vehicles in the mines of WA? Most likely, yes. The UK defense industry is now also recruiting directly from computer games. Interesting new world. Are you prepared for it? Hard to predict the future, but we can be ready for developments like this. The other thing that's happening in a digitized world is that products and services that used to be more physical are now under increasingly electronic conditions moving into services. Marshall McLuhan, the great futurist, said already back in 1967 that in the future, instead of going out and buying a packaged book of which there have been 5,000 copies printed, you will go to the telephone, describe your interests, your needs, your problems, and they at once Xerox, read photocopy, with the help of computers from libraries all over the world, all the latest material for you personally, not as something to be put on a bookshelf. They send you the package as a direct personal service. This is where we're heading under electronic conditions. Products increasingly are becoming services. So when we think about people who know how to work with their hands and maybe tinker with stuff, are they prepared for a future which is increasingly virtual? The great American philosopher George Costanza once said that for everything important in life, it needs to have a package. For your cash, there's your wallet. But kids today no longer will have a physical wallet. They'll have a Google Wallet as a service on their iPhone, scanning your hard-earned analog cash at the point of sale, by the way. Or, for those of you who remember the good old iPod, the iPod is no longer a physical product, but it's a service that sits on your iPhone. Yes, it can now still sit in a physical device, but the iPod no longer is a physical product, it is now a service. Again, are you prepared in teaching your learners to move with that? Are you teaching your baby boomer clients how to deal and interact in that increasingly digitally disrupted future? So how do we sell? How do we sell education and training in this world? Well, sometimes we need to look at business, to smart marketers who are really experts at winning both hearts and minds. There's a great company called SunGuard. What they sell are cloud solutions. Who remember the good old days when the cloud was just a meteorological term? Right? Things were simpler back then, right? Now the cloud is this sort of idea that we store all of this information up there in the cloud. It's sort of cyber, it's real, and my mum does not trust it. So how does SunGard sell why we should move all our physical computer infrastructure into the cloud? Well, one company, SunGard, did this particularly well. They go, hey, we need to sell something that's cyber, that's virtual, that's digital, but we need to connect with hearts and minds. Zombies. Are you prepared for the zombie apocalypse? If the zombie apocalypse happened, where is your data? Where are your training manuals? Are you prepared for the digital apocalypse? So they tuned into this idea of zombies to sell us all on why we should go cloud. Here's a quick video on why. For all those zombie lovers, this is like Disneyland for you.
Have people around you began to change? Do they seem strange, produce strange sounds? Oh, and want to eat your brain? It seems to me that you have a problem with the zombie apocalypse. But don't you worry. How to survive a zombie apocalypse. This can save your life. The most important thing is not to panic and to get rid of any obstacles on the way, step by step. Thoroughly study the situation and then arm yourself. The zombies are pretty slow and unintelligent beings, but for some strange reason, in many cases, they catch their victims, so be careful. How to identify zombies, you ask? Usually, they're stumbling around holding a...
Okay, zombies. Well, the zombies are not really important here, but it's how they sell this new digital world of cloud that's really impressive, because it sort of pulls on our heartstrings as well. For SunGard, the big challenge, both in terms of how they retrain their salespeople, but also in terms of how they re-educated their clients to move from physical computer infrastructure to this virtual idea of the cloud, was to say, hey, you need to move from capital expenditure investments where you buy a thing, a box, something we can all touch, to a service, an operational expenditure. And the best way to bridge the gap between this and this for them was zombies. We need to get a little bit more creative with how we sell the future, both to the people that we train, but also to the organizations that we want to spend money with us, to get our various stakeholders on board. Now, I've talked a lot about digitization. Let me give you one counter trend here for a moment. A great thought leader by the name of Chris Anderson, who's the head editor of Wired magazine, a digital magazine, says that there's a new industrial revolution happening, where after all this virtual cloud stuff that I've just talked about, that's a technical term, we're actually going to move back to some individualized cottage industries of making stuff again. Why? Because of digital technology. He points us towards the fact that education no longer has a monopoly on education, and the fact that through 3D printing and through distributed education like Skillshare, we can all learn how to produce and manufacture shit at home. You've probably heard about people printing guns at home. This is kind of worrying, but we can produce other cool shit as well. Let me give you a quick overview of Skillshare, which is a really cool distributed marketplace for people teaching, training, and providing skill sharing advice around the world today. Think disruption, think new opportunities for connecting with the learner of tomorrow.
My name is Michael Carnchen-Apricorn, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Skillshare.
I'm 29 years old. I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and I moved to New York about 4 years ago because I really wanted to start a company. And New York was a great place to start a company that could disrupt and change an entire industry.
Skillshare is a marketplace and community where people can teach other people in their community skills that they have.
So the way it works is if you want to teach a class, you just go to Skillshare.com, you would post the class that you're teaching. Students that are interested in taking that class will buy a ticket and enroll, and they just show up.
Yeah, I have a pretty strong point of view on education and what that is. And I think one of the biggest problems with education is that it's no longer about learning. And what we mean by that, education is very top-down driven, where learning is very bottom-up. Education is kind of what someone tells you to do, whereas learning is kind of what you want to learn and what you're passionate about, what you're curious about. And for us, our goal and our mission is just reunite learning back with education.
Okay, so that's Skillshare. We'll come back to this in just a moment. But 2 weeks ago, I was working with the Australian National Retailers Association in Melbourne, and on the weekend, I went to this really cool cafe called Captains of Industry in Melbourne. Some of you might know it. And I met this guy, Sean. This is 2014. Sean is a cobbler. Who didn't realize that there were still cobblers in Australia today? And when I asked Sean, how did you learn this old school trade from Northamptonshire in England? He goes, YouTube. His business is built on the fact that he's learning how to cobble shoes on YouTube. So is this disrupting anyone in TAFE, design, fashion schools potentially? Absolutely, because he's going directly to the source, learning from mentors around the world who are uploading skill-sharing advice on YouTube for him to cobble shoes. And yes, I bought some really cool leather goods from this guy, worthwhile checking out. At the same time, the 3D printing revolution is happening right now as well. What you see in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, have not been manufactured as part of a supply chain. The shoes, the New Balance shoes or the Victoria's Secret underwear here have been digitally printed via a MakerBot. This means that printers, desktop printing like we all used to know it, where we printed some colors and dots on papers, we no longer do this because we all live in the age of the paperless office. But you can now, via additive manufacturing, take ideas from the online world and simply print them at home. This is going to give rise to people who love tinkering with shit again, to build cool stuff. Yes, might it go through some quality iterations, etc., before it passes for BHP quality, etc., and ISO quality assurances? Yeah, probably. And I should just apologize again to the ladies that unfortunately they have not done this with men's underwear yet. Otherwise, I would of course show it. But I know this is Australia as well, so no more jokes like that. The other thing we see for anyone that maybe does beauty or provide advice in beauty schools, for example, is that now if you go online and you like a particular Pantone color, maybe in a fashion show, or maybe you like one of your friends' eyeshadows, you can just reach back for your mobile phone, take a little photo of Karen's eyeshadow today, then drag the Pantone color into your printer at home, and it will print that eyeshadow for you to provide straight away. Do you think this is somewhat disruptive to the supply chain of Sephora or Clinique, when you can take intellectual property and simply just print the stuff at home? This is a huge opportunity that all of you need to be aware of and need to be thinking about as you think about what kind of skills to teach in the future. Let me give you one example of how Skillshare is doing this pretty smartly.
Designer evangelist for education here at Shapeways in Long Island City. Shapeways is the world's leading 3D marketplace where you can buy, sell, design, and print custom objects of your own making. The class I'll be leading you through today is called From Concept to Product, an Introduction to 3D Printing. We'll be learning a brief history of 3D printing, materials and processes, design workflow, and a simple project to help you turn a 2D drawing into a 3D printed object. We can print designs in 30 plus different materials, including gold-plated brass, ceramic, full-color.
Okay, worthwhile checking out Skillshare at home. The essential question here in my first argument today is, what educational touch points do you believe can be digitized And are there any educational touch points that can never be digitized? And maybe, as a follow-up question, are there any educational touch points that should never be digitized? Which ones may be the ones that you should digitize to win the hearts and the minds of the learner tomorrow? But don't just think about Gen Y or Gen Z or Gen X. Also think about what baby boomers who need to reskill and re-educate need. Okay, this leads me to my second point shortly. Of course, it would be unethical of me not to share some digital resource materials with you guys. We've set up a special landing page for you guys for the Training Providers Forum at http and then semicolon, right, ow.ly/x20RO. I'll show that one for you in a moment again, for those of you who are used to handwriting rather than taking photos. Feel free to do whatever. I'll share this presentation and some other resources and materials with you guys as well in the spirit of sharing and skill sharing. Cool. Second point. Learners are taking life lessons into their own hands, literally via their smartphones. Let me share some pretty grim statistics with you for just a moment. The Australian Productivity Commission, together with the Australian Bureau of Statistics in the context of gambling in 2012, asked Australians and then audited Australians who said that they spend $100 on a particular item or a particular service. They audited that. When you kind of say, oh yeah, spent $100 on transport last month. Well, the Australian Productivity Commission and the ABS did some research on this. They audited the process, and what they found is that that $100 wasn't $100, it was actually $104 audited. Now that all sort of comes out in the wash, right? But it gets a little bit more worrying. When we say we spent $100 on clothing and homeware last month, love, the real amount was $132. When we said we spent $100 at the pub last night, honey, the real audited amount was $158. And when we say we spent $100 at the pokies or at the casino just down the road, the real audited amount was $735. When we listen to our gut instinct, at times we totally suck. And here's why the mobile revolution is going to make all of us smarter. This is Raj. Raj lives in Kerala, India. For generations, easy to say if you're Swedish, for generations, his family's gone out to sea. They're in aquaculture, big word for fishermen. They've gone out to sea, they've caught the catch of the day, brought it back to one of 11 different harbours in Kerala, oftentimes dictated by their gut feel, i.e., where is the closest to our family. We're tired at the end of a big and physically straining day of work. So we go back to our home harbour, even though we have a choice of 11 different harbours to decide and choose from. One day, Raj realised he'd saved up enough money to buy a Nokia mobile phone. And he realised that up to 22 kilometres away from the shoreline, he could get coverage. Raj realised that he had some mates who lived in the 11 different harbours, and he called them on his way back. He goes, "What's your price? Can you do better? Got some great barramundi." And all of a sudden, he started making new, smarter decisions with his now mobilised digital mind. After a little while, Raj's mate also started adopting the same technology because they saw that he was making more money than they were because he made smarter decisions based on his mobile technology. The Economist magazine got a hold of this story, audited the process, and found that on average, the net yields for the fishermen in Kerala went up 8% as a result of mobile technology, and the price to the consumer went down 4%. This should give all the economists in the room sort of economy goosebumps in a perfect moment of sort of economic equilibrium between demand and supply. But this is not just a story unique to him. This is also what's happening to some of my clients in the power tool industry. For example, Black & Decker found that when they were sharing these devices amongst their sales staff to record little YouTube videos on how to use the power tools in the store, all of a sudden, through collaborative sharing, sales were going up because they shared the essential selling techniques in a new sort of distributed learning environment with one another. My clients at Hilti are doing similar things at the moment, sharing via mobile devices, driving economic benefits. Today, this technology is not just something that is a monopoly of the big end of town. And I found this out a couple of years ago when I spontaneously ran the New York Marathon. Don't do this at home, ladies and gentlemen. 16 hours before the race, I got a bib. Technically, Sorman-Nilsson has never run the New York Marathon. I ran it in somebody else's name. The critical thing that got me through this particular race was not my fitness, because I always knew that when you sign up spontaneously for a marathon, the last 39 kilometers are always going to suck. Was Nike Plus, a little app in my mobile phone that now gave me the same capacity, same real-time insights as some of the most professional athletes around the world. Through Nike Plus, I was able to get real-time views on things like my speed. I could tell, for example, through Nike Plus, the couple of times I really slowed down to go to the bathroom, which is critical information. I could tell when I slightly sped up because I was running through more dangerous neighborhoods. Now, this sort of technology used to be something that maybe the Dockers have been using over the last few years, or the likes of Chelsea Football Club in London. But now this sort of technology is available to consumers, sharing with us things like heat maps on how other people around you are performing. Now, I don't know why in Nike Plus these guys were going for a jog like in these distributed territories here when all the action was in here. We can get real-time insights into topographical geolocation maps like this. But there's nothing like a little bit of analog feedback every now and then, ladies and gentlemen. Like when I overtook this guy at 21 kilometers. Clearly, I was also quite a sucky runner that day. But the really interesting thing about this is what Nike has realized. Nike used to sell us stuff, physical things, shoes, shorts, t-shirts, hardware. Now they also sell us software. I started my running career running with ASIS shoes. But Nike Plus has realized that this ecosystem, this data is so sticky, so pedagogical, so behavior changing, that after using this service about 5 times, you're more likely to buy a Nike item in store. And now they know exactly how many steps I've run and when I need to replace my Nike runners, which gets a little bit Big Brother-esque and freaky, but it is getting back to this point of what my mum should be doing in her store, offering advice to the hearts and minds of individuals of one. Hardware, software, combine the two together. Think about how I'm changing, learning, being agile as a result of a great digital mobile service in this regard. So what you all need to do in this instance is to realize that learners today are taking life matters into their own hands, life lessons into their own hands, whether they be for their health, their exercise, or their financial management. Websites like mint.com pull all your real estate, your investment portfolio, your mortgage information, your overspending on credit card into one beautifully visualized sheet like this across devices to give you a real-time insight into your net worth any moment in time. It can also help buzz you in your back pocket at the point of sale when you're thinking about buying something at Tiffany's, and it goes, don't do it, because you've overspent on your jewelry spend this month. that also drives behavior change and new learning outcomes for people. Think about whether you're doing the same in how you develop and sell your training programs. But it's not just the younger demographic that will use this sort of mobile technology. In fact, if we look at global mobile health revenue, it's expected to grow exponentially over the next few years. And 65% of that global mobile health market will be in monitoring. Yeah? It will be baby boomers monitoring their glucose levels and making smarter decisions around mealtime, for example. And smart companies are tapping into this, gamifying what they provide for us in terms of learning. I want to share one example before I turn to the final argument here today. This is from one of my clients, AIA, an insurance company, actually making health and life insurance sexy again, which is maybe a hard task, but they're managing. They're gamifying life lessons, telling us how we can go from bronze level health to platinum level health, and thereby lowering our premiums, but also attaining better health outcomes, literally taking our life lessons into our own hands.
To Gold Vitality status. Vitality is Discovery's science-based wellness program that rewards you for improving your health. Every time you take a healthy step, you'll earn points and gradually move from blue to bronze, silver, and finally gold status. First, complete our online health assessments by visiting the Know Your Health section on our website. You can complete a Vitality Health Review, a mental well-being assessment, and a non-smoker's declaration. Then, learn about your health by visiting a Vitality accredited pharmacy for a Vitality Health Check, which consists of a blood glucose, blood pressure, cholesterol, and weight assessment. Do further health checks by visiting your GP or specialist. These can include an HIV test, vaccinations, various cancer screenings, and other health checks. And complete the Vitality Nutrition Assessment at a...
Again, worthwhile checking this out at home in your leisure and learning time. When you're sitting next to the boss looking at YouTube videos, you can say that you're doing research. But this is pedagogical, it's sticky, it's engaging, and it's turning something as bland as insurance and sometimes our health, which should be important, but we kind of don't always treat it as such, into something that's sticky, it's engaging, it's delivering informational value, visualized beautifully to our digital minds, but it also pulls along our analog hearts. My mum sometimes argues for the way things used to be, and I love the fact that she's now learned how to YouTube as well. Let me give you one example of this. She recently sent me this little YouTube video, because while she says that, yes, Anders, everything might digitize in the future, maybe there are some things that can never be digitized. So she sent me this little advertisement just a few days ago.
Emma. Huh? Emma. 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 Emma.
So clearly, paper has a great future, right? So as you probably imagine, the annoying futurist son and my wonderful mother, we sometimes have pretty interesting conversations around the family dinner table. But one of the things that we've both agreed on now is that maybe this analog world of the hardware, the face-to-face, the personal touch, the belly-to-belly, and the digital world of which I'm such a proponent, big word, analog world and the digital world don't have to be mutually exclusive. Maybe there's a sweet spot between the two where you can win both analog hearts and digital minds, where adaptive businesses and adaptive RTOs and state training providers get that there's a sweet spot that combines the two that I like to call the Digilog. Big word, my mum loves it, and yes, I'll be signing some later on. If I wasn't such a sweet, I'd tell you to buy one. You can later on. Was that an awkward sell? Slightly, okay. Let me get back to this one and share with you just some examples before we wrap up of how to go Digilog in how you win digital minds and also analog hearts. This is critical because it's not just going to engage the digital natives, but also the digital immigrants, which are going to be key as we need to re-educate and re-skill and teach them about all this weirdness in a digitally disrupted future. Why? Because digital doesn't fix everything. In fact, digital can stuff up human communications, and they can lead to digital miscommunications. Yeah, for anyone that's tried predictive texting, you'll know exactly what I mean by this. Also, we mustn't throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. Who here remembers your first digital MP3 download? Couple, it was probably a criminal act on Napster, but this is a safe, loving, sharing environment, so it's cool. On the contrary though, who remembers your first analog vinyl record or your first tape cassette? Okay, I still remember, and maybe we're demographically biased, right? But the digital can be ephemeral. It can be a moment in time, and maybe it's not something we truly learn from, something that's truly sticky always. And it's interesting that even in a world of instant digital downloads or even renting access to digital music via the likes of Spotify, vinyl sales are growing 20% year on year at the moment. And a colleague of mine was recently just moving out of her maternal home because why? Her Gen Y kids would never leave it. And so she was making tea one day when one of her kids came running down from the attic with a bunch of vinyl records going, "Mum, mum, 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 when were you a DJ?" Clearly, again, some intergenerational weirdness. I really just show this slide here because when my brother and I are out and about, people go, "Sing us that song." My Scottish sucks, so I'm not going to do it to you today. But the interesting thing about this digital world is that there are counter trends now towards the analog world as well. This is Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Yahoo. She realized that the digital world can be phenomenal for what? Information. But she realized that analog's phenomenal for transformation. If I'm going to change the culture of Yahoo to being a high-performing company again, I cannot do it via teleconferences. Everybody needs to come back into the building so that I can change the analog culture. This is what she's setting out to do. Analog transformation, digital information, at least for a few more years. I would love to see WA learn from the great state of Bavaria in Germany. Bavaria is famous for really silly hats, drinking too much beer, and wearing a lot of leather, like the Lederhosen. But their economic policy for the last 10 years has been about combining digital and analog together. They go, how can we be high touch but still high tech? How can we respect the technologies and the industries that have been here for a really long time while still going high tech and digital in the future? So they went laptops und Lederhosen. No bull, their economic policy is called laptops und Lederhosen, digital, analog together. And this is going to be critical because their companies like Bayerische Motorwerk, also better known as BMW, has realized that some of its workforce is aging. And they go, what's the average age of our workforce in 2020 going to be? 57 years of age. Why don't we create a team of 57-year-olds today, study how they work, what aches and pains they have on the production line, maybe create ergonomic furniture just for them, and see how we can create greater engagement and efficiency for them. Efficiency went up 9% for this particular team. It didn't just become an effort around re-educating the baby boomers, but they rolled this program out to the whole workforce. This is how we should be thinking about the future. Because in Australia today, we need to re-educate people who come back into the workforce, who might have been laid off, who might have aches and cramps, and might need to learn something new. Check out the movie, The Internship, if you want some inspiration for that. Because Australians today are living longer lives and we're staying younger for longer. In fact, STDs or STIs are increasing drastically for baby boomers in Australia at the moment. This is kind of worrying, but it means that we're living longer, happily engaging in youthful activities for very much longer. 20% of Americans over the age of 75 still have sex weekly. Okay, that is a true statistic, by the way. So we are younger for longer. And the analog hearts of baby boomers are going to need to be re-engaged as we reskill and re-educate for the future. 78% of baby boomers in Australia say that we're people savvy, 22% say that we're tech savvy. We need to engage, yes, both with their digital minds and their analog hearts for the future. A couple of final examples, and then I promise I am going to wrap up. The digital world and the analog world don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can make even something as unsexy as supply chain extremely sexy, engaging, to win the hearts and minds of people around you. Sometimes we need to look to old school businesses like agribusiness to get inspiration for the future. This is from the brand Icebreaker in New Zealand, that have integrated their whole supply chain. They provide us with great clothes for the outdoors. When you buy the item, at the back of the item of these New Zealand clothes, there's a little barcode to indicate that the item is sourced from natural fibers in New Zealand farms. You can trace the entire supply chain back and see where your underwear and the threads of your underwear came from in New Zealand, connecting us from farm to table all the way back to the New Zealand sheep farmers and the third generation families who are looking after these sheep that provide their merino wool for the items. This is digital and analog coexisting, working together to give us new insights. Again, it's pedagogical, it's teaching us something, but it's the analog and the digital coming together in the Digilog. Finally, it would be remiss and unethical of me as a Swede not to speak about IKEA before we wrap up. IKEA is the largest printer in the world of a single volume of print. They print more IKEA catalogs than the Gideons print Bibles, and they're in every hotel in the world around us. So when they thought about how do we engage not just the people who love receiving the physical catalog and complain if it's one day late, but also the digital learners of tomorrow, they went, hey, can we make our catalog Digilog? And so this is what they did. Now you simply throw down the IKEA catalog in your room, on the floor, in your living room. You put it down on the floor and through your mobile device it will jump alive for you. In 3D you get an insight into how it will shape, how Billy the bookcase might come along and how you can change the shape of it, the color, etc. This is analog and digital, analog hearts and digital minds. Again, go and visit this on YouTube. Now, I began this presentation talking about little Max Harpham, the little 8-year-old kid in Hornsby in Sydney. Now, the digital technology is all well and good, but if it wasn't for the people at the Shepherd Centre in Sydney who provide therapeutical support to families who've just found out that their newly born is born profoundly deaf, if they didn't calibrate the technology or help him also know how to lip read when his batteries go out, the technology just wouldn't make sense. We need great teachers, we need great mentors, we need people like you to engage both digital minds and analog hearts. And if you think back to my little mum, here's how we do Digilog in our little store. You don't need IKEA's budget to get this right, ladies and gentlemen. This is my dad here. He's a retired colonel in the Swedish Army, which is a great career move because we never go to war. Although he always reminds me that he's been both to Kosovo and Afghanistan with NATO troops. And he's just doing something quite pedagogical here, teaching this timeless wisdom of how to do a four-in-hand tie knot. But he's doing it in a digitally amplified fashion that got picked up by the major Swedish newspaper and then digitally amplified via Twitter and Facebook in Sweden, resulting in my mum's 2 best months of sales over the last 10 years. And yes, I think there is a correlation.